Well, let's move on to the subject of Ukraine, a situation which seems to get worse every day. And let's have a little look at how the BBC is having to deal with the fact that the Ukraine counteroffensive is not making any ground. Here's the Institute for the Study of War Maps, which the BBC likes using. But the only thing we've got to show us what's happening on the front are these tiny little green dots. And of course, the BBC trying to hide the fact that there's no progress, but what the public can now see is that the fighting is limited to the very, very edge of the Russian-held territory, and the minimal movement forward by the Ukrainian forces can only happen at huge cost. But the BBC really got into trouble here because they're now saying that, well, all that uncertainty surrounding President Putin's regime and a year and a half into a disastrous war, apparently for the Russians, although they are at the moment holding their ground and are not dying in the numbers of the Ukrainians. But this might feed the anxiety of those NATO countries who would prefer the war to end around the negotiating table. And of course, the BBC certainly does not want the war to end. Let's have a look at a little bit of a clip. This has come from Free Russia channel, from Michael. Thank you very much for the work you're doing. Let's have a look at a little bit of his report with some really harrowing footage of what's happening to Ukrainian troops as they try and attack.
It has also been reported that both Russians and Ukrainians are reinforcing this sector, here near Lapkovo and especially here near Orikhiv. And we are sure to expect another Ukrainian push in this sector. Here I have a video for you of a tragically failed Ukrainian offensive in the general area of Orikhiv. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the entire video because it is gruesome. There are people stepping on the mines, but I will show you what I can. So here you can see Bradleys that had struck the mine. It would seem that part of 37th Ukrainian Brigade ran into a minefield. So here you can see they are attempting to save wounded Ukrainian soldiers that are located here. In fact, the worst part is they are still on the minefield. If you are to watch this video on your own, for which I recommend you to join my Telegram channel and see it there, there is a mine somewhere here, and when one of the soldiers will walk to assist these guys, this mine will explode into the face of this guy and blow up his leg. So here the soldier is attempting to get onto a Bradley. He is planting his gun to use as a platform and go over the mine. He knows there's a mine but not sure where exactly it is. Then the mine explodes. Again, I cannot show you the footage, but seemingly he is okay. Here from far away you can see many wounded Ukrainian soldiers, and a infantry fighting vehicle is attempting to save them. At some point there was an incendiary rounds shot in this general area.
Well, really harrowing footage there, which obviously Free Russian channel didn't show, we're not going to show. But the reality is that the Ukrainian attacks go on with massive casualties because NATO and the West want those attacks to happen. And if we just have a look at this little bit of social media where somebody picking on the two US Senators, Graham and Blumenthal, these are the war hawks, and we have a little bit of video footage here where they're making a statement on what happens if it goes nuclear, basically.
We're introducing a resolution today, since the Senate resolution, that says that if Russia or Belarus, or a proxy of Russia, explodes a nuclear device inside of Ukraine to stop the counteroffensive or to try to break the will of the Ukrainian people, such an attack should be considered an attack on NATO itself. We're of the belief that a nuclear weapon unleashed in Ukraine would irradiate large portions of Europe where we have NATO allies. And why are we doing this? President Biden says threat of Putin using tactical nuclear weapons is real. That's like the 20th story down. So with a sense of urgency, we're urging our colleagues here to get serious about what could happen in Ukraine. Moving the tactical nuclear weapons out of Russia to Belarus was unnerving and I think very provocative. The counteroffensive is moving slowly but steadily. they're looking for a break. They will commit the forces that have been trained by the West, 6 or 8 regiments, thousands of well-trained, well-equipped forces will be put into the battle when they can exploit an opportunity.
Well, David, time to bring you in, because if we've got Americans who are desperate, it seems to me, to ramp the war up, are we fit to fight a war here in UK?
Yes, this is the subject of the recent speech at Russie by the head of the British Army. That's General Sir Patrick Sanders. We see him here. So what did he have to say? Well, I'm pulling out here from the Army's own website the quotes that they thought were most outstanding. Firstly, he said that Ukrainian bravery and sacrifice is buying us time. Time to modernise, time to train ourselves, time to ensure that we are prepared. So I suspect that's not what the Ukrainians on the front line think they're fighting for, but that seems a somewhat cynical view of the Ukrainian sacrifice. General Sir Patrick Sanders also says, he said, last year I said I was prepared to look at the structures of our army if I judged that it would make us better prepared to fight in Europe. That time is now. So we're talking about active preparations by restructuring what's left of the army for a war in Europe, a continental army. This has not been debated in Parliament. This has not been debated in the country. This is just happening. And the tone is urgent. He continues, there isn't a moment to lose. We must now take the same spirit of mobilisation, like the language here, mobilisation, and turn it towards transformation, the next steps in the reforms that started with Future Soldier. So we're going to reform our armed services. We're going to make them much more fit for the next war. We're actively preparing now. In the depths of his speech, which was reproduced on the Army website in full, he said that our armoured reconnaissance vehicles came into service in 1973, our infantry fighting vehicle Warrior in 1987, and Challenger 2 in 1998. These are rotary dial telephones in an iPhone age. So he's saying they're massively out of date. He said, first we will think and fight differently. The initiation of Project WAVELL under the release of the new land operating concept are important steps. However, there's no room for conceptual complacency. We must keep refining our theory of victory. This is obviously referring to internal discussions that are not really part of the public or political dialogue, and I think they should be. Those of you sceptical as whether we can do this, I recommend you go to Warminster and see the Army's Experimental and Trials Group. You will witness the future of British land warfare, so we'll have to do some of that. I did go looking for Project WAVELL on the Army's website. Didn't go very well. There was a link, but the Army's very sorry. They can't seem to find that page. I managed to find a little bit of description of what Project WAVELL was. It will define how the Army best helps the nation win in competition and conflict. Competition and conflicts. This is hybrid warfare. Everything now seems to be war. We're now using the Army in competition with other nations, which is an interesting idea. Operating at the heart of integrated joint coalition and multi-domain effort. So it's all about integrating it with other nations. So that does imply giving up sovereignty, no discussion of that. So that's where the British Army is just now, Brian.
The word obscene quite a bit in recent news, and I find the idea that you want those Ukrainian troops to die on the front line to buy us time to get our military in order, when in fact it's been our own government and the top tiers of the military which have destroyed it over the years. But let's sacrifice a few more Ukrainian lives. Well, back on the subject of Ukraine itself, let's just have a look at this little video clip. We'll bring it up on screen. I'll have to just talk a little bit as it plays. Hopefully it is going to play. But Lukashenko, Belarus President here, this was taken over a year ago, but he's shut down NGOs. And the BBC reporter interviewing him is clearly getting quite upset. because, as he is saying, we've destroyed all your little structures, your NGOs that you've been paying for. We didn't touch the ones that were working for the good of the people of Belarus, but we've got rid of the others. They're all going to be liquidated. Now, liquidated was the term used in the translation, but what he's saying is you smashed everything up here. So if we haven't liquidated them, those Western NGOs already will do so in the near future. Now, why is all of this so important, what this man was saying and the reason he was so angry? Well, we're back on the West's subversion of Ukraine. And what do we need to remind ourselves? Let's have a look at the video clip of Victoria Nuland talking and praising herself and others for the work they did in those early days in Ukraine. Let's see how.
And U.S. advisors serve in almost a dozen Ukrainian ministries and localities, helping to deliver services, eliminate fraud and abuse, improve tax collection, and modernize Ukrainian institutions. With U.S. help, newly vetted and trained police officers are patrolling the streets of 18 Ukrainian cities. In courtrooms across Ukraine, free legal aid attorneys funded by the U.S. have won 2/3 of all the acquittals in the countries. Treasury and State Department advisors have helped Ukraine shutter over 60 failed banks and protected the assets of depositors. And since there can be no reform in Ukraine without security, over $266 million of our support has been in the security sector, training 1,200 soldiers and 750 Ukrainian National Guard personnel, and supplying life-saving gear. In FY16, we are continuing that training and equipment of more of Ukraine's border guards, military, and Coast Guard.
Well, if that was the US involvement in Ukraine in the early days, getting in amongst the fabric of society into the grain of politics in order to control it for the West, the UK, of course, was right alongside it. So let's have a look at what the UK was up to, and we'll do it in a bit more detail. So here we've got women, the key target, of course, of the West, because if the women can be controlled, all sorts of changes can be produced in society. But what we're interested in here is the UK assistance programme in Ukraine in 2017-2018. This is the tip of the iceberg. What were they after? Well, they were after everything: governance and reform, anti-corruption, accountability and communications, conflict, humanitarian points, human rights, bilateral program, education and culture. And money came in a variety of directions, not huge amounts, but remember, this was the early days and plenty more has followed. And what has the aim been for UK to be able to take control of society in Ukraine? And here we have governance and reform. And it says that Ukraine's successful transition to democracy and adherence to good governance is in the UK national interest. So this is nothing about Ukraine. This is all to do with national interest for the UK. And if we dig into the people they're using to put this in place, we've got global partners. And if we look at the background to this man, he's involved in behavioural change. So this is the applied political psychology. If we go into a different direction, establishing an intellectual property court for Ukraine, we've got Queen Mary University here of London. We don't know what the involvement is, but just fascinating that they are now looking, presumably, to control intellectual property. We've got this one here, which is public financial management. And on this one, we bring in a German organisation. It is quite incredible if you look into the depths, because you'll see it involves individual German states in getting involved in Ukraine. We've said Barbarossa, German invasion by another means, but something is very, very wrong here. And of course, this is why Lukashenko and the Russians themselves have been very upset with West's movement into their areas. We've got electoral points here, and this one is particularly interesting because the agency they're using to deal with it involves nation states. So we've got the US State Department, we've got the UK government, we've got the French, Canadian and the Swiss all getting a finger into control what happens in elections in Ukraine. We've got support to small and medium-sized enterprises in the food chain, bring in the European Investment Bank. And if you get deeper into the program run by the European Investment Bank, you'll see that you're into global banks and the hedge funds very quickly. But the banks are also going to provide ombudsman capability for businesses. So we're going to control businesses through the banks. Are they the people to judge businesses? I wouldn't have thought so. And if we move on here, we've got managed funds, governance and economic reform, bring in the big accountancy firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And of course, wherever there's big money, there's a need for big accountancy to balance. Those are big books, but it's all above board and transparent. And of course, nothing unusual going on. So we're told. If I bring in this one, and this is where we see focus back on the women, because we've got promoting women's political participation, the National Democratic Institute involved. If you take a look at that, and I'm going to encourage our audience to do that, you'll find that very, very quickly you're into very high level US government operatives. And not only are they working through the US government, they're working with ambassadors from many other countries. So essentially, we want what we're looking at is rules-based democracy, using women as social change agents to take control in Ukraine. And here we've got another one. This is the EU advisory mission running this one. But this is about security sector reform in Ukraine. And note that very quickly we are targeting women. We've got the women in the paramilitary uniforms, and this is all part of the same agenda. Last one, difficult to see. It's the invisible battalion. And if we pop this quote up, we get the meat of it. A sociological survey conducted by the Invisible Battalion team in late 2015 uncovered that outdated legislation allowed women to hold administrative positions such as signals, cooks, tailors, and such. But thanks to the research of the unit, the list of combat positions for women was expanded. So what was the agenda? To get women out of the home. We don't want them doing anything wonderful with families. We want them on the battlefield fighting. And we only have to go one step further, and we come into open democracy, praising the work of this invisible battalion. So pretty obvious what's actually going on there. And then, of course, the key agenda, LGBTI, that is to be pushed home in Ukraine by the National Democratic Institute again. And we've also got the Swedish International Development Corporation pushing this. So LGBT is a key part now of the West drive in taking control of Ukraine. And it didn't take me very long to have a look into this to see that LGBT expertise and initiative was going to include very specialized medical expertise in sex change operations. David, it's pretty obvious that the West has taken control of Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't speak for itself anymore. It's a vassal state. But luckily, there are people at least now standing up to say, no more war.
Well, yes, this takes us to Saturday and Edinburgh on the green outside Holyrood Parliament. This was the rally we were advertising last week, Rally for Peace and Freedom. So speaking there, as well as ourselves, was David Clues, Peter Ford, Lon Wilson, Colin Buchanan, and Alex Pearce. Speakers were excellent, and we've got a few clips of our contributions. First, we have Mike being interviewed by We the People North East.
Do you feel that the world's forgotten biology, or is it going insane?
I think the world is going insane, yes. I think if people stop to consider what's going on around them, they see it very quickly. But I think that most people, unfortunately, are not willing to stop. They're caught in the hamster wheel of chasing their mortgage payments and so on, and they therefore don't have time. Now, of course, that may just be an excuse. It may be that they just don't want to think about some of these issues because they're scary, or they're too scary, or they're just things they don't like. So, I think this is our biggest challenge: is how we find a way to encourage the majority to engage. And if we look at what happened over lockdown, a lot more people were engaging on issues over those 2 years because it affected them directly. So, you know, we might see that as you know, ultra low emission zones get rolled out, as 15-minute cities get rolled out, we might see a lot of those people that were active during COVID and sort of drifted away. In the meantime, we might see a lot of those people coming back. But that's not enough. We need to get Middle England. I hate that phrase, but you know what I'm talking about. We need to get the majority of people active.
And next we have an extract from Brian's speech. The full speech is on We the People North East. So thank you. We'd like to thank them for the footage and for being there and making this record. This extract covers Brian's view of how the Western democracies are being manipulated and the people changing their outlook so that they support a much more aggressive stance compared to with respect to other countries.
The weapon of applied psychology is an open secret, but most people have no idea. In the Scottish Parliament, they're using it on you. Every day, on every subject, how you drive, what your children are going to be taught at school, how you're going to pay your taxes, whether you live in a 15-minute city, every document, every video, every statement is put together with applied behavioural psychology, so the message goes straight in your head. This is not me making something up. Read the Mindspace document where they boasted how effective it was. And where did they sell it? They sold it, first of all, the technology to America and Australia. Just take Australia. It used to be a really interesting country. They didn't cause much problem. They drank a lot of beers. They had strange animals. And now you've got Australia champing at the bit to get involved in a war against China. Where did that come from? And I'm going to suggest it came from the use of political applied psychology exported from the UK to Australia.
Finally, there's a piece for me, and I was looking at what Orwell said and saying how right I thought he was when he predicted that we'd be in a world where war was peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. With respect to Ukraine, we're told that if we negotiate, that's like Munich, that makes it like war, and will bring about World War III. So if we try to get peace, we end up war. With war, war is peace. This clip is me looking at the issue of whether ignorance is in fact strength these days.
I've discovered during my work with the UK column is why ignorance is strength. And this comes down to what the West call hybrid warfare, which is a toxic and horrible concept, whereby we're always at war with everybody. Well, certainly with the Russians. It's just a matter of whether the shooting has started or not. Everything's warfare. There's no such thing as peace. It's non-binary. There's no peace in war. It's not a binary anymore. It's a spectrum. You can have a little bit of war or a lot of war, but you're always at war. And everything's a weapon. Right? Your economy's a weapon. Your faith is a weapon. Your beliefs are a weapon. Your ability to be convinced that the government narrative is correct is a weapon. Your ability to be silenced and prevent you objecting is a weapon. And therefore, if the government succeeds and ignorance rules in our land, they do see it as strength, because it means that none of us can be used by the other countries to undermine their agenda. So the government agenda becomes stronger because people like you are not there saying no.
So that's an extract. Please check out the full speeches, including those by Peter Ford and others on We the People North East.
Okay, David, thank you very much for that, and a very big thank you to everybody that arranged that event up in Scotland, and of course everybody that attended. It was wonderful to meet you all.